I travel the world trying to put things back together. You know, Trump did not leave a very good situation. You think I'm kidding? No matter where I go in the world, whether it was the Inter-American Conference we just had for this hemisphere, or NATO, or dealing with the ASEAN countries, or the Far East, guess what? They look at me and I say, America's back. And they look at me and they say, for how long? This is America. We can do any damn thing we put our minds to.
That was President Biden speaking at the AFL-CIO convention yesterday. His enthusiasm comes on the heels of wholesale prices reaching record high, rising to nearly 11% in May, and the majority of economists predicting a recession in 2023, according to a new poll conducted by the Financial Times and the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business.
Amid rising inflation, gas prices, and more, Americans are letting their thoughts be known at the polls. We are a third of the way down from midterms, and voters already backed over 100 GOP candidates. Here to discuss what all of this means for Democrats in November is Hill reporter Julia Manchester and contributor at Newsweek, Pamela Denise Long. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
All right, Julia, I'm curious. As much as I never shy away from a criticism of Joe Biden, there is some extent to which the inflation is caused by these broader supply chain issues that are caused by the global pandemic and are outside of the administration's control. Obviously, there are things that he should do and that we've been advocating for him to do, and guests on the show have been advocating for him to do. But to what extent do voters, you think, expect there to be a real sea change if they do, in fact, change the composition of Congress in the fall?
You know, I think there is definitely an expectation that this could lead to something new. You know, I was down in Virginia's 7th congressional district, which is represented by Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, a very vulnerable, moderate Democrat running for re-election. I've been talking to a number of Republican candidates, and I've asked them just that question, Brianna. You know, this isn't necessarily 100% former President Biden's fault. Current President Biden's fault. There are lots of
too aspirational.
Sounds great. It's been a long night. Sorry, it was up till 1 a.m. for the primaries. There are lots of factors playing into this right now in terms of inflation and such. But, you know, these candidates and Republican primary voters essentially point to what they say is the spending from the Biden administration, the spending from the democratically controlled Congress as contributing to inflation. So, you know, yes, it's definitely a legitimate question, but I think that's what you're hearing from Republican candidates. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of Republican primary voters and maybe even independent swing voters going into November, you know, they're frustrated with what's happening right now when they go to the grocery store, fill up their car with gas. So I think they're looking to blame the person at the top, and that's the Democratic Party right now.
So with respect to spending, are our voters saying things like, I wish I hadn't gotten a stimulus check, I wish we hadn't gotten child tax credits, I wish we hadn't been, you know, buoyed through the pandemic with a number of programs that polled very popular at the time? Or are they pointing to some other spending that's perhaps more abstract or that I'm not thinking of in the moment?
No, I think Republican primary voters are just, you know, from what I hear, they say government spending. So, you know, look, maybe it is what you mentioned. They just believe that there needs to be a cutback, really, and not as much government intervention. That's what I'm hearing from Republican primary voters. Now, independent swing voters, obviously Democratic voters, I think you could hear a different story.
Denise, what do you think? You know, the Biden administration, Biden himself, I get maybe he's caught between a rock and a hard place where he doesn't want to, you know, concede that the situation is as dire as it is because it's, you know, his policies. He's the one in charge. But then by not doing that, I think he comes across as not willing to admit that the situation is as bad as many Americans, not just hard right Republicans, but many Americans overall think that it is. So does he sound the right note when he talks about this thing? I don't think he does. What do you think?
I think it reeks of gaslighting to me. I think it reeks of denial and, as you said, denial of responsibility and hiding his hand. So there are some ways that definitely Americans who could not work because their places of business closed, couldn't function remotely, or whatever the case may be, needed stimulus during COVID, during the height, let's say, of COVID-19. But there are some ways that the money spent toward businesses was excessive in the extreme and not effective in helping the average American citizen. That is the issue I think that many people have, not to mention the, I think, obscene amounts of money and other things geared toward Ukraine. And some estimates, we're thinking that could be upwards of $1 trillion. Yet we have Americans not able to fill their gas tank because, again, balancing the financial equation for them. And then we have a border crisis with people just flooding into the country and the pressures that places on demand as well as supply. So there are some ways that Biden needs to answer the call for the chickens that are coming home to roost for him. And what you see is people want an Americans first agenda. That is what the American government is supposed to be doing. And only the GOP is offering that.
Yeah, Denise, I think that you're right, that it might not be the spending, generally speaking, but the idea that the government is willing to spend on folks that aren't them. And so if you disaggregate, and perhaps if Democrats were able to talk more specifically about, okay, this was the spending that we put, this was the money that we put in your pocket to help you through a recession, here's the money that we're going to help you with going forward, instead of having all of these instances, that, like the ones you pointed to, spending on Ukraine, spending on big business, the CARES package being the biggest upward transfer of American wealth in American history.
What about like the airline bailout?
I mean, exactly.
Industry-specific bailouts that don't help help a very narrow slice of the American people, maybe, but it's that, I think it's that kind of spending people point to and say, what was the point of that?
Absolutely, we should have just bought the airlines. Well, that's a separate debate, I'm sure. But Republicans, of course, people are speculating, are likely to have Donald Trump on the ballot again in 2024. The question is, will Democrats have their own version of Trump? Are they going to start this conversation up that they had back in 2016, 2017, where people thought the best way forward for Democrats was to match Trump's star power with some star power of their own? Oprah Winfrey is being floated again. She has created political candidates out of her coterie on her show in the form of Dr. Oz. Do we think that it's likely that she or someone else with a similarly high profile, a public profile, and a high approval rating might get in the race? I'll throw that to you, Denise.
Yeah, so I think Democrats are, again, desperate at this point. And what is the Democratic Party when they say that all Trump offered is star power? Sure, many of us, most of us, I would say, have grown up with the presence of Donald Trump in music, on TV, his shows, his businesses, and the like. However, Trump did offer more than that to the American populace, which is one of the reasons he was so popular. It's not just that he was a star, it's that he spoke truth to power in a way. It's that he offered and centered the American people. He talked about securing the border, lowering legal and illegal immigration. All of those things are very important. Look, America is a specific country with a specific current people. And we really, the Democrats need to learn, the GOP needs to really lean into taking care of the American people. So if people vote for Oprah because Oprah's Oprah and she's great when it comes to literacy and books and spirituality and all the like, I think that's beautiful, but it's empty. We need politicians who are going to secure America and take care of Americans.
Julia, give us a reality check here. It's one of the favorite games pundits play to go, what wild political thing could happen? What if they switch the ticket? What if they change the vice president? What if, something crazy happened? And it almost never does. It would be totally unprecedented. No matter how unpopular he is, he's actually still like the leader of the Democratic Party and more popular than a lot of other Democrats and would not give up power willingly. It's kind of crazy to think about. So, give us the reality check. Oprah is not coming to the rescue for the Democratic Party. I'm sorry.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, look, from what we've heard, from talking to White House officials, from talking to people in Biden's circle, look, he's planning on still running. And I think there is a legitimate question as to what kind of candidate he would be in the running for a second term, given the really intense political headwinds, the political times we live in, the fact that there doesn't really seem to be anyone else, or there's a criticism that there doesn't seem to be anyone else to, take that on in the Democratic Party, to be able to unite the progressives and maybe more moderate or establishment Republicans. And you can make the argument that Joe Biden hasn't done that. But I think, look, like you say, Robbie, he is the leader of the Democratic Party right now. That would lead to absolute political upheaval. And I think in an election year, especially when Democrats are vulnerable, and assuming that 2022 goes the way we think it will and not be a great year for Democrats, I think Democrats will want to be united and not having to deal with an inter-party struggle as to who will lead it going into a presidential year.
Absolutely. It's unbelievable wishful thinking to think there's going to be anyone other than Biden for Democrats to vote for.
And what's kind of funny is that I think we do have our Trumps. Trump was a Democrat turned Republican billionaire running for office. There are tons of Republicans turned Democrats running for office, from Michael Bloomberg to Caruso in LA. So we've made our bed, and now we're living in that reality. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.